I love seeing new companies entering the audio market, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, having new companies join the market adds extra competition, and it means that all of the companies then in the market have to produce the best possible products that they can at the best possible prices in order to succeed in that market. That's good for all of us because it means better value for money. The second reason I love new companies joining the audio market is because they have to be innovative. They have to do something different to what's already being done, or do the same things but do them better. It might be getting the same performance that you used to get, but now for less money, or it might be getting a better quality of product for the same money that you used to spend. The possibilities here are fairly varied, and as I wrote my notes for this review, I became aware of the fact that I'm not entirely sure where the Zikman audio cables fit into that equation. There's no doubt that the build quality and finish of their cables is excellent, at least that's based on my one experience of the Zikman Tiber cable that I'm here to talk about today. According to their website, the Zikman audio cables are designed in Austria, they're built using German wire, and they're hand assembled in Croatia. And they also seem to have put a lot of care and thought into the design of their cables. The Zikman Audio website has some really interesting articles on it that cover topics from things like the differences of different metals used in the wires, through to the different types of braiding options and the pros and cons of the different weaves. One thing that they don't seem to be doing is producing cables that are significantly cheaper, or maybe cheaper at all, than the competition. The Tiber cable here, for example, retails for €499. That's noticeably more than a seemingly equivalent sort of cable in terms of the wire materials from an established brand like Double Helix cables. I can't comment on the specific metallurgy and the differences between the metallurgy between those two brands, and I can't comment on the sound of the Double Helix cables because I don't have one here, but the fact that the Zikman Tiber cable has a higher starting price means that it has to perform well to justify its place in the market. Thankfully, the quality of the metals in the Tiber cable and/or the use of superfine 0.05mm strands of wire in the cable result in a really pleasing sound. And more than that, it's also a very supple and comfortable cable to use. I would say that this cable, with how soft and flexible it is probably one of the best cables I've ever used in terms of cable comfort. Most of the cables that I own and use these days are all Effect Audio cables, and so that's what I had to compare the Tiber to. Starting with the recently reviewed AXC cable from Effect Audio that I reviewed just recently, the Tiber definitely looks and feels more premium. And then to my ears, it sounds better too, the Tiber cable that is. The use of pure silver and pure copper is always preferable to me when compared to a silver-plated copper and copper combination, and that's what's being used in the AXC cable is the plated version versus the pure versions in the Tiber cable. That's why it's more expensive. Of course, Zikman Audio do also make silver-plated copper cables. I just haven't tried those yet, but I generally find that a silver-plated cable can tend to be a little bit glarier or a little bit harsher than a pure silver and/or pure copper. Silver plating is cheaper than a pure silver wire, as you'd probably expect, but I think you can generally almost always hear a difference. Certainly as I compared the Tiber cable and the AXC cable from Effect Audio using the Hidizs Mark XII IEMs, the Tiber cable sounded significantly more refined. It sounds a bit smoother and a little bit richer, but very importantly, there's also more detail. In other words, it's not just making things smoother, richer, and warmer, it's refining the top end whilst bringing out additional details. Knowing that silver-plated cables are basically never my favourite though, I decided to go for a more balanced test. The Effect Audio Eros II cable that I've got here retails for $299, so it's a fair bit cheaper than the Tiber cable. Despite being cheaper, the Eros II uses a combination of pure silver and some copper-silver alloy where the two metals are melded together into one single alloy, and so it should be closer in sound to the pure metal wires as opposed to the plated wires. This time around, I was listening with my custom molded Fur Audio Radon 6 IEMs, and the differences again were immediately apparent. The Tiber cable was a little bit brighter than the Eros II cable, but it somehow also managed to deliver a weightier and punchier bass. I don't know exactly how that is, because if you were to measure the frequency response of the IEMs with both cables, they're going to look identical. And so I can only assume that it comes down to the exact timing of how each frequency travels through the cables. That's actually one of the arguments for using tiny, tiny strands of wire as opposed to thicker strands of wire, because each different frequency travels at different depths along the wire. If you have a really tiny strand, everything's traveling at a more consistent depth in the wire because there's only so much to work with. And so that could theoretically be the cause of the differences between these wires, but again, it is just a theory. What really matters is that they sound different. They both sound good, but the Tiber has a distinctly different sound to the Eros II. And what that distinctly different sound is a slightly brighter top end and a slightly weightier or more present bottom end. That results again in a little bit more sense of detail and texture from the Tiber cable, and overall, an exceptionally enjoyable sound. In fact, it was so enjoyable that I started to think that the Tiber would now become my go-to cable of choice on the Fur Audio Radon 6s. But to earn that honour, it had to beat my current go-to favourite cable in the form of the Effect Audio Fusion 1. The Fusion 1 cable is insane. It's $1,199 for an IEM cable, and it's a combination of copper, silver, and gold wires. Or actually, I think it's gold-plated silver wires, and copper wires. It's some combination like that. The Fusion cable brings with it an addictive combination of clarity and refinement. And the Tiber cable gave the Fusion 1 cable everything it could handle. I do think the Fusion 1 cable slightly won out overall in the end, but you also would hope that it would, because it's over twice the price of the Tiber cable. And I also can't ignore the fact that the Tiber cable is also significantly more comfortable to wear than the Fusion 1. The Fusion 1's quite stiff, quite thick, and it can be a bit uncomfortable. The Tiber cable, as I said before, is probably the most comfortable IEM cable I've ever worn. Coming back to the sonic differences though, where the Fusion 1 stepped a little bit ahead for me was that it has a slightly richer, fuller mid-range presence, and I personally like that. That's going to be a question of personal preference though, and I'd have to say that that's also about all there is between them. I felt like the Tiber was a match for the Fusion 1 on things like detail, separation, and overall sense of refinement. And in my experience, the quality of detail and refinement for a cable is generally a really good measure for the quality of wire used on the inside. Higher quality wires generally transmit the very fine details better and don't tend to get harsh or glary. Standing up to an over $1,000 behemoth like the Fusion 1 is no small feat for a sub $500 cable or sub €500 cable in the form of the Tiber. And so given the fact that the Tiber cable is so comfortable, so nicely put together and finished, and the fact that it sounds so good, so refined, so detailed and so clean, I think it justifies its place in the market, even though it's not the cheapest cable around, and even though it's not doing anything radically different. It's just doing the same things very, very well, and possibly better than some of the competition. So if you want to know more about the Tiber cable, if you want to buy one, or if you want to read up more about the Zikman audio range, why they do the things they do, you want to learn a bit more about the different wire types, braiding types, and all sorts of things, then click through the link in the description down below to check it out. To be clear, it's not an affiliate link. Zikman Audio did send me the cable to review, but that's where the connection ends. On the other hand, if you want to know how an IEM cable can possibly cost more than $1,000 like the Fusion 1 does, I've pinned a video here at the end explaining all of that, so go watch that one next. For now though, a huge thanks to YouTube channel members, thank you to channel Patreon members, and thank you to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.